Okay, so we're going to be talking about Tisha B'Av, and in context, we're going to be talking about its history, why we fast, why people fast, and how you could draw some meaning from it. So when you're talking about the history of Tisha B'Av doesn't begin with the destruction of the temple. It begins in the spy story that you're familiar with. The Jews are in the desert. They send spies to presumably strategize their future entrance to Israel. Instead of coming back with a strategy, they came back with despair. They said it's unconquerable, it's beyond God's ability. People wept the entire night, and a decree was made that this was weeping in vain. One day you will have weeping that's real. So this sounds very petty, nya, 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 okay? What does it mean? What it means is if in your heart there's a place of unresolved despair and it's not healed, that place eventually will have to be rectified because you can't go through life with despair. Time passes. The Jews entered the land, and years pass, 369 years. Finally, the first temple is built. So I want to tell you what the temple is. So again, we have to go back much earlier than the actual temple. How many of you have actually read through Chumash Shemos? Any of you have done that? Look how honest you are. I'm so impressed. Okay. So chapter after chapter after chapter deal with the tabernacle that they built in the desert. And you read this, you say, what does this have to do with anything? Why am I reading this? So I want to tell you why. The introductory verse says, build me a sanctuary and I'll live, what should the next phrase be? And I'll live in it. But it doesn't say that. It says, I'll live in you. Meaning, the act of building the sanctuary gives you a map of how to bring God into you. Everything about it, every metal that was selected, the colors, the materials, they're all part of this great map saying, here's a vessel, it could be full. Put it together, make it part of you, and I'll be with you. So to understand this in greater depth, God is with all of us anyway. The question is whether God's presence within us penetrates all of the other stuff. There's so much other stuff. So God's presence needs a vessel to receive it, to make it happen. So we've all had times in our lives when we were more spiritually aware than others. Is that not so? So the direction that was given in the Torah is, if you make me a temple, you go there, and those moments of awareness are going to be integrated into your personality. So they built a temple. The temple had two main features. One feature was the ark, and the other feature was the altar. Those are the two primary features of the temple. So I want to explain to you what they were about. The more confusing of the two is the altar. So again, I want to take you back before we go forward. When God created the world, he centered all of the spiritual energy that would lead to every act of goodness and kindness and redemption that will take place in its creation. So that's called Shechina. When we say Shechina, we're talking about the force of Hashem's presence that he allowed to enter a physical world. Why physical? Did you ever wonder? There's so much inner goodness we have, so much generosity and kindness and truth, potential for truth. Why do we have to be living in a world where when we think of like great afternoon, you think what? Froyo. What's this all about? What's it all about? So the answer is, God doesn't want us to be non-physical. He wants us to find him in the world of physicality. So the idea of make a sanctuary for me means here, this world should be God's sanctuary. Adam, the first person, got it. He understood it. This world should be a sanctuary. Not like up there with the angels. Here, now, today. So the place of the sanctuary is primarily within us. But within us, we have two different aspects of self. There's the spiritual self, the self that when you hear something of spiritual beauty and grace, you say, yes. So today in one of the classes, I asked the girls to identify heroes. So one of them told a story that I think all of you heard about a commander in the army who entered a room in which the Arabs had thrown an explosive, and he threw himself on the explosive to take the force of its explosion and died to save the other soldiers. That's heroic. That's beautiful. Look what we could do. But we have an animal self. Moo. Okay, you're familiar with that self? Okay, so to get greater familiarity with the animal self, yeah? Picture yourself at, a bar mitzvah celebration. And they're serving buffet style, okay? The big tables, but they underestimated the number of guests. And on one side of the table is all the good stuff. The Chinese food, like all the good stuff. And on the other side is what I would call egg salad. Yesterday's coleslaw. Okay, shall I go on? Because you're going to see it soon at lunchtime. Okay. So I shouldn't have said that, should I? Okay, and it's on film. But I don't think anybody thinks that Neve has to serve bar mitzvah every day for lunch. I don't think anybody thinks that. So you find yourself shifting to this side of the table. And you're casing it out like there are three layers of people. How are you going to maneuver yourself to get to the front? And you're not thinking rationally. It's the animal self that's doing all of the thinking. It's not like, I personally have come to the conclusion that the weak and the elderly really don't need Chinese food as much as I do. That isn't like that is, it's moo, there it is. Okay, so you have the animal self. The animal self isn't evil, though. The animal self is instinctive. Instinct and evil are not the same thing. Instinct could be holy. You could take your desire to eat and say to yourself, I'm hungry, so that homeless man needs soup. Because I'm hungry, I know what hunger is. You understand this? It could be elevated. Okay, I'm into survival. Another aspect of the animal soul's energy is fight or flight. I'm interested in survival. That person who has no home needs to survive. This could be elevated. And you don't have to necessarily address it to the other person. Even the purely animal self, you have your little plate of Chinese food, and they did CPR, the woman will be fine. Okay, so even if you look at it and you let it take you all the way back to its source and take some delight in God's giving, that's also something. So the main task in life is to elevate the animal self, which is bringing light to a dark place. So the way that took place for Adam, the first person, was that he offered the animal after bonding with it to God. That was the first sacrifice. So the way a sacrifice would take place later in the temple is specific animals were chosen that reflected different aspects of the animal self. Okay, I'm just going to give you two examples because we're late. So one is a sheep, the instinctive self, the follower. How many of you, be honest for a minute, then you can go back to being your usual defensive selves. How many of you know that you've done stupid things just because other people do it? Okay? So that's the sheep in you. But that could be holy. If you decide, I will follow God's will with my eyes closed, that's holy. You have the goat in you, and that's the only other animal I'll speak about. There were many other animals. A goat is an animal that only pursues its own desire. You can't get it to plow. You can't get it to do anything for you. So we all have an aspect of ourselves that just wants to do what it wants to do. This has to do with all sorts of animalistic energies, sexual energies, other energies. Okay, so no other Neve teacher will ever tell you to go in this direction. Think about a rock concert for a moment. You there? Never think about a rock concert again the rest of your life. Okay, okay. That energy could be holy. One day you'll have children, a husband, people who need your warmth, who need your touch, right? So it's about elevating that part of self. You have to touch it and bond with it and elevate it. So in the temple that happened. So what was the result for the Jewish people? For the Jewish people, it was that they were elevated. It worked. Okay, the other main feature in the temple was the Aron, the ark. The word Aron comes from the word or, which means light in Hebrew. It's the source of light. So I'm sure you've all had what they call in psychologists aha moments. Do you know what I mean? Okay, so an aha moment is you're not there's this and there's that, and okay, and you're playing with your head, and suddenly you get, oh, right. That's it, right. This is really where I have to go. This is really what I've got to do. Right, and you're able to dispel all of the confusion. So everybody would wish their life to be full of aha moments, but we get confused. We're confused by the immediacy of events, by our bonds to other people, by our physical desires. The Torah is light. Because here is the way to go. This is your guide. This is your map. So God told us to build a temple, and we did. So far, so good? Okay. Why would he ever say that it will be destroyed? The destruction was prophesied. He said, this is what's in the cards. So what I have to tell you is this. Okay, imagine, for instance, that you were unscrupulous. Of course, you're each one of you individually the soul of honesty and integrity, but pretend for a moment that you were unscrupulous, but you're very good at the computer. So you have a 3D computer. You could do whatever you want. You learn how to manufacture Rav-Covs. You all know what Rav-Covs are? Okay, so this is a good business, yeah? So I'm sure one day somebody will figure this out. Okay. So, you sell Rav-Covs, like let's say they go for, 100 what? 50 shekels for whatever number of rides. You're giving the same number of rides for 20 shekels. People are buying. You're doing really well. Could things like this happen in life? For sure. Okay, I looked at somebody just now and they were like, yeah, you could. No, wrong way to go. Okay, so suppose you saw the end of the story. Now, most of the time when people do the wrong thing, short term, they get away with it. This is why people do the wrong thing. If most thieves got caught immediately, there would be no thieves. If most of the time you would tell a lie, somebody would say, hey, that's a lie. You would never lie. Okay, most of the time, short time, the wrong decisions work. Long term, you're left with yourself. When you're left with yourself and your relationship to life is how much could I get, then your life is going to be pretty empty at the end. Do you all know bitter old people, the kind of people who you say, how are you? And say, well, how should I be? That kind of person. So this comes from a long life of negativity. Negativity comes when you see that the whole rest of the world is them, and then there's me. And maybe you'll introduce a few people to your inner circle, but it's still me against them. You end up living like an animal. So that's what the Torah does. It gives you clarity. It gets you beyond the moment. So having a fake sanctuary doesn't do it. It's like having a fake Rav-Cov. It represents what you want to sell somebody else. You could fool I would assume you could fool the transportation system with a fake Rav-Cov. You can't fool God with a temple that no longer relates to where the Jewish people are at. So if what you think is, all right, here's an animal, oh, sure, I'm elevating myself, that's not going to do anything. Quite the opposite. It creates illusion, and illusion is bad for us. So with the first temple, God noticed that there were 3 things that we were doing that were reflective of how we lost our ability to live the kind of life we should. But let's go back a minute. What kind of life is that? So when you ask somebody, or if somebody asks you, which is more likely, what does being Jewish mean? What does it mean? What are some answers people give? It's a specific sort of a relationship with Hashem. Non-Jews also have a relationship with Hashem. What's unique about a Jewish relationship with Hashem? The Torah and the ability to hear Torah. Torah is known to the world. The Bible's been published innumerable times, but it speaks to the Jews. Why? When Avram lived a bigger-than-life life, God made a covenant with him. A covenant is an unbreakable contract. Something of you will be retained in your descendants. The covenant was repeated with Yitzchak and with Yaakov. You're Jewish because you have something of them in you. If a person converts, it's because they found the part of them that's in them, even though there's no covenant. Without there being an oath, no matter how much you try, there'll be something of me in you. Okay, so here are 3 sins that reflect having lost what these patriarchs could give us. The Jews at the time had fallen to a place where some people were even capable of murder. Some people were worshiping idols. Some people were even capable of murder. Are there Jews today who are capable of these things? There are. So what does it mean to be capable of a promiscuous relationship? Okay, what does that mean? It means you see the world through the eyes of a taker. All very promiscuous relationships, incest and the whole slew of them, are exploitive. Somebody for whom Avram is alive and well inside can't exploit another person. So the fact that there was exploitation means that the people had lost something of Avram in them. If you're devoted to God the way Yitzchak was, that he was willing to allow his father to sacrifice him, even though that in the end turned out not to be necessary, you can't worship idols. All idols, in case you didn't notice this when you look at other religions, all idols are a certain dimension of self-worship. People find what they treasure in the human state, and they worship that. It's a certain form of self-worship. If you're devoted to God, you don't worship yourself. Okay, and the last, Yaakov's most significant trait, the trait for which he's known, is truth. If you're a person of truth, you can't murder another person because the other person's life has value. So if these things could happen, even if it wasn't the average person who did any of them, the society declined enough, and God gave us information prophetically, that the Beis HaMikdash at that point was a fraud. It wasn't reflective of who we were. And it was destroyed. Okay, 70 years pass. We're allowed to rebuild it. So you may think, 70 years, new generations, people changed. Everything is better. So I want to tell you a secret. Nothing changed, except there was one factor that made us redeemable, and I want to tell you what that is. That factor is defining ourselves as a people with attachments to each other. So if one person is a failure in this area, somebody else is perfect in that area. And as long as they're identified with each other, God sees us as a whole. So this is called achdus. This means, for instance, if you hear a story that's deeply moving and you say, yeah, that's how I wish I was. That's how I wish I was. And you're sincere. And you recognize that the part of you that's bonding is the Torah part of you. God sees you and the other person as though you're one person. Because on a spiritual level we are, only physically we're separate. So I want to tell you an example of this. There's something that in other years Neve attended, but this year didn't work out for technical reasons. Once a year during the 9 days, throughout all of the religious world, they have one evening that's devoted to improving communication. It's called the Shmirat HaLashon evening. So they had two meetings in Binyanei Omah, which is the largest convention center in Jerusalem. The first one was for English speakers, the second one for Hebrew speakers. The first one, now remember, this is only English speakers, filled up the entire auditorium. We're talking about 3,000 places, except from really bad seats in the higher areas. Okay. But the second one, which was for Israelis, and this is Israel, that was like out into the street. They opened every possible room. They had simultaneous videos going. What's this for? It's for people who recognize that the only way we'll ever achieve this kind of unity is if we speak kindly of each other. If we attach each other to one person to the other through words, through caring. It's the only way that this is going to happen. So one of the ways that this happens is when people pray for each other, for instance. So besides the act of prayer, it also creates a unity of spirit. Another way this happens is when people are there for each other in times of need. So we were okay. That level was okay, enough for us to be permitted to build a second temple. The second temple wasn't like the first temple. The first temple was a huge place full of every possible precious metal, gorgeous. It had everything. It was spiritually whole. You go in with all of your issues and your stuff and your garbage, and you came out okay. The second temple wasn't like that. Didn't have the ark. It had the outside of the ark, but inside the ark there was no Torah. The Torah was buried deep in the ground. Okay, none of the miracles that happened in the first temple happened. But what was there? There was unity, and there was love, and there was caring, and there was response from God. What made the second temple no longer viable? So I'm going to tell you two stories. One is a political story, and the other is an internal story. One's the outside, and the other is the inside. You know how nothing changes? Have you ever noticed this? Well, that's true in Israel. I don't know if that's true everywhere. If you were to pick up an old Israeli newspaper, let's say from 1961, what's the headlines going to be? Tension on the northern border. Predicted cabinet crisis. Will there be an increase in taxes this year? More aliyah from the West is desired. Could you print that paper yesterday? Yeah, nothing changes. It's just like, little differences. Okay, so here are the political parties of the Second Temple. I am not making this up. You could see it yourself in Josephus. They had 3 parties. Okay, parties. Okay, they had the Assimilationist Party. They really were called, I'm not making this up, Friends of Rome. Okay? So they just want to be like more Roman than the Romans. They want to take everything the Romans believed in, or more correctly, didn't believe in, and make it part of their lives. So then you had the extreme nationalists. Not 1 inch. Okay, yeah? Then you had the religious parties that were squabbling with each other. Has anything changed at all? Nothing. Nothing. Okay. So on this backdrop, yeah? Okay, on this backdrop of kind of self-definition, okay, earlier you could ask, why did the Romans get in anyway? What brought this about? So the Jews came in under Persian rule, right? They were sent out to Babylon. Babylon was conquered by Persia. Okay, the Persian kings let the Jews come back. The Persians were conquered by the Greeks. I still have you? Okay, then you have the whole Hanukkah story. Hanukkah. Okay, then what happened? Okay, one of the kings who were descendants of the Maccabees, one of them, okay, died. His name was Yanai. His wife, whose name was Shlom Tzion, became queen. So far, this makes sense? She has 2 children, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. And the way things went in the ancient world, who should rule? The elder. But the younger was stronger. So there's a civil war. Okay, who's going to win? If one is stronger and one is weaker, who's going to win? The stronger. But the weaker didn't give up. He made an alliance with the Romans that they should send their soldiers to help him gain his legitimate claim to the throne. And once they were here, they never left. So this is called senseless hatred. All along, the divisiveness, the pettiness, the parties, everything is about senseless hatred. So this is all the outside. Here's the inside. There was a man, we don't know his name. Okay, he had a friend called Kamtza. Kamtza means stingy. Do you have friends who people call stingy? Hey, I'm going over to stingy. Okay. Likmot means to grab something in your hand. So that tells you something about the man's friend and the man. So in those days, the mail service worked just like it does today. This is one of the few things that technology has not touched. You mail a letter. What happens? You put it in the mailbox. Then what happens? A human being will come, take all of these letters, okay, sort it out, and then another human being will put it in somebody else's mailbox. Isn't that true? So that means, I want you to realize this, nothing happened in the last 4,000 years in terms of making mail delivery efficient. Okay, there's still the same basic method. So the human mail person had to give out this letter addressed to Kamtza, and he made a mistake, and he delivered it to Bar Kamtza. Oops. Bar Kamsa happened to be the man's enemy. Bar Kamsa comes to the party, okay? The man says, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? And he says, you sent me an invitation. And he said, I did not send you an invitation. He said, I received an invitation. Let me just stay. Everybody saw me come in. Let me just stay. So the man said, no. I'll pay for my portion. Remember, these are very stingy people. No. I'll pay for half the party. No. I'll pay for the whole party. No. So the man had no option. He left, but he left bitter. So what he did when he left is he began to let his anger, which anger tends to be progressive, boil on the inside, and he stopped being angry at the host. Who do you think the anger was felt? Who got the brunt of the anger? All those people at the party who just sat there like he was like gefilte fish, didn't say a word. They see him publicly humiliated. Not a word. He became angry at the Jews, his own people. He went to the Roman governor. He said, the Jews are plotting against you. If you were the Roman governor, would you believe him? No. He said, prove it. So he said, you send an offering to the temple, they're going to find a reason to refuse it. And he did. He sent a calf. Secretly at night, Bar Kamsa got into the holding area, made a defect in the calf's lip or eye, we don't know which, made it unacceptable as an offering. It was sent back. And what does he have to say? See, I told you. So the Roman governor at this point realizes that his offering was rejected, bought into Bar Kamsa's story, but he understood the way things work better than most people do. So, so God wants me to be the one who destroys Jerusalem? I'm not going there. He shot arrows in every possible direction. No matter where he shot, it ended up towards Jerusalem. He said, I'm not going to be God's angel of death. He made that decision. He disappeared from Roman history. This is very interesting. Okay? He's not the one who destroyed Jerusalem. He was replaced by Titus, who had no problem with this. Okay, so why am I telling you this? What does this have to do with you? None of his destruction could have happened without the backdrop of senseless hatred. It's all about that. So now we have Tisha B'Av being about two things: the loss of the temple and the cause of the loss of the temple. These are two things. Now let's talk about what comes forth from them. Okay, we've been in exile for 2,000 years. We are the second generation to have things easy. Do you realize this? How many of you have suffered in a severe way for being Jewish? Any of you? Neither have I. But if you look at the 2,000 years of our history, are we the rule or are we the exception? We're the exception. So the 2,000 years of blood and guts, all of the hatred that there is in the world. Tell me three things that are wrong with the world. Come on, let's hear three things, quick. What's wrong with the world? Hatred, selfishness, corruption. Okay. Yay! Okay. And I went through a terrorism, hunger. There's a lot. Okay. None of the things that are bad in the world could possibly be maintained if people had God consciousness. Could you see where this is so? The result of the destruction of the temple is the departure of God's presence from the world on an experiential level. That's what's lost. This is the worst loss that could possibly happen. So when you think about all of the terrible things that happened, just think last year. Three things that were awful that happened last year. Come on, three awful events. Terrorist attacks. Tell me anything else. Massacres. Tell me more. Melting ice caps, which have to do with irresponsibility. Police brutality. And racist response to that police brutality, I would add. Okay, because both things are in the picture. Okay, we're still living with lack of God consciousness. So, as one of the great civil rights leaders used to say, you're either on the bus or off the bus. That means you're either moving towards the restoration of the temple or you're not. You're either on the bus or you're off the bus. So you have to be able to commit yourself towards living the kind of life that would lead logically to the rebuilding of the temple, which has to do with liking people. I won't even use the word loving people, that's too heavy. Liking people, being optimistic enough when you meet someone to want to see what's good and positive and beautiful in them and believe that it's there. What does this have to do with fasting? Okay, so what this has to do with fasting can only be understood easily with a parable. Imagine a parent who has several children, and two of the children are in terrible shape, drug addicted, in the skids, suicidal, whatever, yeah? Okay, if the other kids in the family act like everything is just fine, how do the parents feel? How do the parents feel? They feel invalidated. They feel terribly grieved. You could see this? There are two kinds of holidays in Judaism. The holidays that have to do with God's closeness to us. That would be Paysach, the time of great love. He took us out of Egypt. Shavuos, he gave us his mind. There can't be a gift more intimate than that. Sukkot, we're surrounded by him. Those are the holidays of closeness. Tisha B'Av is a holiday of distance. So there's so much awful stuff. This must cause God, the Shekhinah, such pain. There's so much awful stuff. And other things happened on Tisha B'Av. That's when the Inquisition began. World War I, which was really the start of World War II, opened on Tisha B'Av. There's so much awful stuff. I can't just sit and feed my face. So this is the day of empathy with God for the plan that didn't work. He wanted a world that would be different than the world we had, and we could make it different. But it is as it is right now. This is what the fasting is about. So the fasting has integral purpose. It shows that you're in there with God. You're not acceptant with the world's current situation as being as it should be. You're willing to break out of complacency. So some of you know there's been a continuum of laws of mourning beginning from the 3 weeks, right? Okay, you had Yud Zayin Tammuz, and from then on there are no weddings. Okay, then you get to the 9 days where we have more restrictions. Then you get to Tisha B'Av where there are many restrictions. Okay, did you learn in the halacha classes about the restrictions? I would imagine you did. Okay, and the reason why it gets progressively, it's getting progressively closer to the actual moment of destruction. The moment of destruction, when they threw torches in the temple to burn it down, was at noon. And something very interesting happens at noon in halacha. You know what happens? We begin to relax the laws of mourning. At noon at Tisha B'Av, you're allowed to stand up and sit on a regular chair. Okay, you could read whatever you want. You don't have to just read the mournful parts of Torah. You could greet people. That seems very, very mistaken. That's the worst moment. Why are we relaxing the mourning? So I want you to hear why. The mourning is for the sake of change. The mourning isn't mourning as an end in itself. The mourning is for sake of change. I'm far, we are far, we want to draw near. And we believe in the possibility of drawing near. Thus the Gemara says that Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av. The possibility of redemption begins with rejecting everything that led to the destruction. So when you're there, you could say, okay, and now we're moving on. Okay, so this is what I'm leaving you with. You should have a meaningful Tisha B'Av. Okay.